Hello and welcome to Fundamentals of Cybersecurity CSCI150N. This is Chapter 22, Incident Response, and I'm your instructor, Peter Keurig. In this chapter, you will learn how to understand the functions of incident response process, implement the detailed steps of an incident response process, and describe standards and best practices that are involved in incident response. In this lecture, we'll discuss the foundation of incident response process, and standards and best practices. An incident is any event in an information system or network where the results are different than normal. Incident response is not just an information security operation. Incident response is an effort that involves the entire business. The security team may form a nucleus of the effort, but the key tasks are performed by many parts of the business. Incident response is a term used to describe the steps an organization performs in response to any situation determined to be abnormal in the operation of a computer system. The causes of incidents are many, from environmental such as storms, to errors on part of the users, to unauthorized actions by unauthorized users, just to name a few. Although the causes may be many, the results can be classified into classes. A low-impact incident may not result in any significant risk exposure, so no action other than repairing the broken system is needed. A moderate risk incident will require greater scrutiny and response efforts, and a high-level risk exposure incident will require the greatest scrutiny. To manage incidents when they occur, a table of guidelines for the incident response team needs to be created to assist in determining the level of response. Two major elements play a role in determining the level of response. Information criticality is the primary determinant, and this comes from the data classification and the quantity of data involved. Information criticality is defined as the relative importance of specific information to the business. Information criticality is a key measure used in the prioritization of actions throughout the incident response process. The loss of one administrator password is less serious than the loss of all of them. The second major element involves a business decision on how this incident should play into current business operations. A series of breaches, whether minor or not, indicates a pattern that can have public relations and regulatory issues. So let's look at the anatomy of an attack. Attackers have a methodology by which they attack a system. Although the specifics may differ from event to event, there are some common steps that are commonly employed. There are numerous types of attacks, and from old school hacking to new advanced persistent threat attacks, the differences are subtle and related to the objectives of each form of attack. Attacks are not a new phenomenon in enterprise security, and historical examination of a large number of attacks show some common methods. So the traditional steps are footprinting, scanning, enumeration, gaining access or escalate privilege, pilfer, create backdoors, cover tracks, and then do a denial of service. Footprinting is the determination of the boundaries of a target space. There are numerous sources of information, including websites, DNS records, and IP address registrations. Understanding the boundary assists an attacker in knowing what is in their target range and what isn't. Next is scanning, looking for what systems are actually there, and maybe even looking for what systems aren't there, what kind of defenses aren't there. Then enumeration is getting in there and determining what are these systems. Are they Windows systems? Are they Linux systems? What versions are they? So enumeration is gathering as much information as possible. Then there's gaining access. Gaining access is pretty straightforward. It's getting into a system that you don't otherwise have normal rights to access. Escalating privilege is coming in at a lower level and escalating yourself to a level where you can do more harm or get more access. Pilfer, pretty straightforward. That's take the information you're looking for. Creating backdoors, that's creating a persistence mechanism, a way of getting back in if your primary means of intrusion is detected and closed on you. Most advanced hackers or attackers in advanced persistent threats will have multiple backdoors, multiple ways to get into the systems that they really want to have control over. Then they cover their tracks. They can go in and they modify logs, knowing what logs will generate what. They can pretty much wipe their tracks clean so that you don't know that they're there or never knew that they were there if they're no longer there. And then there's denial of service. When everything is said and done, if their ultimate goal is to take down the system, they will, be it through a denial of service attack that's coming from externally or doing something inside the system, such as wiping a hard drive or corrupting an operating system file or something of that sort, in order to deny you of the services of the system that they were in. Depending on the size and type of organization you're in, advanced persistent threats is something that is really can be a really big concern. So, if you're obviously working for a defense contractor, government agency, or somebody who supports some kind of government function that nation states or larger adversaries would want to attack, chances are the advanced persistent threats are either trying to or are already inside your network. A relatively new attack phenomenon it has been labeled as advanced persistent threat because it is an attack that always maintains a primary focus on remaining in the network, and that's those backdoors I was just talking about on the last slide. Operating undetected, that's why they cover up their tracks, and having multiple ways in and out. Advanced persistent threats began with nation-state attackers, but the utility of the long-term attack has proven value, and many sophisticated attacks have moved to this route. Most advanced persistent threats begin via phishing or spear phishing attack, which establishes a foothold in the system under attack. From this foothold, the attack methodology is similar to the traditional attack methodology described in the previous section, but additional emphasis is placed on the steps needed to maintain a persistence on the network. So first, they're going to define their target. They're going to look for or determine who they want to attack. They're going to research them. They're going to look for what kind of people work there. Is there anybody there who might be susceptible to phishing or spear phishing? They're going to select what tools they're going to use. Once they understand what the target is they're going after, they're going to test for detection. They often will do a minor little incident to see if the organization responds to it. So they might take one or two computers down on a network with a virus and see how the company or organization reacts, and so forth. Then they're gonna initiate the actual intrusion. getting into the network once they understand how you respond. Establish an outbound connection. This helps to maintain their persistence on the network. Sometimes it's called beaconing. They're going to obtain credentials. Obviously, the higher the level of credentials for them, the more effective it is. They're going to expand access. They're going to move from account to account if they can, looking for the account with the right access or elevated enough access to get to the information they want or the services they want to either exfiltrate or interrupt. Then they're going to strengthen their foothold. They're going to put more backdoors and more persistent mechanisms in case one or two get detected and closed out on them, they still have a way into their network. They'll cover up their tracks by deleting logs or modifying log files and things of that sort. And then they begin exfiltrating their data. And because these attackers are persistent and long-term, don't expect to see just a huge exfiltration of mega loads of data, gigabytes or petabytes of data going out your doors. They pull off or siphon off slowly. It's not uncommon for them to use a protocol like DNS, where it's beaconing out every couple of hours to exfiltrate just a few bytes at a time of information that they really want. And they can do that over a long period of time, and it becomes very hard to detect that on your network. So your incident response needs to have goals. The goal of the incident response process can be multidimensional in nature. You want to confirm or dispel whether or not the incident is actually happening. You want to promote accurate information accumulation. Make sure you're getting the real picture of what's going on. You want to establish controls for evidence. So you want to make sure that you're gathering evidence in such a way that it's not, and we're going to get into this in just a couple more slides, but you want to make sure that you're not destroying evidence that you might need to prosecute whoever the attacker is. You want to protect privacy rights, so you want to prevent further exfiltration of maybe sensitive personal data. Minimize disruption to the operations, so the sooner you can get your operations back to normal without it affecting your capability to do business, the better. Allow for legal and civil recourse. Understand that there might be some legal or civil means of addressing what has happened to you against the person who attacked, or vice versa. It may be that your customers may have legal recourse against you because you failed to do what you needed to do to properly protect their data. And then provide accurate reports and recommendations. You want to make sure you're recording things all along the way. And we'll talk about this in a couple more slides. But you want to make sure you're recording things along the way and whatever recommendations so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time an incident happens. Incident response depends upon accurate information, and without it, the chance of following data in the wrong direction is a possibility, as is missing crucial information and only finding dead ends. The preceding goals are essential for the viability of an incident response process and the desired outcome. Incident response is a set of actions security personnel perform in response to a wide range of triggering events. These actions are vast and varied because they have to deal with a wide range of causes and consequences. Through the use of structured framework, coupled with properly prepared processes, incident response becomes a manageable task. Incident response is the new business culture norm in information security. The key is to design the procedures to include appropriate business personnel, not keep it as a pure information security endeavor. The challenges are many, including the aspect of timing, as the activities quickly become a case of one group of professionals pursuing another. Incident response is a multi-step process with several component elements. The first is organization preparation, followed by system preparation. An initial detection is followed by initial response. Then isolation, investigation, recovery, and reporting. Incident response is a key element of a security posture and must involve many different aspects of the business to properly respond. This is best built upon the foundation of a comprehensive incident response policy that details the roles and responsibility of the organizational elements with respect to the process elements detailed in this chapter. Incident response efforts begin before an incident occurs. That is, before something goes wrong. Preparing an organization requires a plan, both for the initial effort and for maintenance of the effort. The following items should be addressed and periodically reviewed in terms of incident response preparation. Develop and maintain comprehensive incident response policies and procedures. Establish and maintain an incident response team. Obtain top-level management support. Agree to ground rules and rules of engagement. Develop scenarios and responses. Develop and maintain an incident response toolkit, which should include system plans and diagrams, network architectures, and critical asset lists. Practice response procedures using fire drills and scenarios. Systems require preparation for effective incident response efforts. Incident responders are dependent upon documentation for understanding hardware, software, and network layouts. Understanding how access control is employed, including specifics across all systems, is key when determining who can do what, a common incident response question. Understanding the logging methodology and architecture will make incident response data retrieval easier. All of the questions should be addressed in planning of diagrams, access control, and logging to ensure that these critical security elements are capturing the correct information before an incident. After the hacker has a list of software running on the system, he will start researching the internet for vulnerabilities associated with that software. Numerous websites provide information on vulnerabilities in specific application programs and operating systems. Understanding how hackers navigate systems is important. For system administrators and security personnel can use the same steps to research potential vulnerabilities before a hacker strikes. This information is valuable to administrators who need to know what problems exist and how to patch them. Another part of the preparation is security measure implementation. All data that is stored is subject to breach or compromise. Given this assumption, the question becomes, what is the best mitigation strategy to reduce the risk associated with breach or compromise? Data requires protection in each of the three states of data lifecycle: in storage, in transit, and during processing. The level of risk in each state differs due to several factors. Time. Data tends to spend more time in storage, and hence is subject to breach and compromise over longer time periods. Quantity. Data in storage tends to offer a greater quantity to breach or compromise than data in transit, and data in processing often even less. If records are being compromised while being processed, then only records being processed are subject to the risk. The same thing with records in transit versus the entire database which is in storage. Access. Different protection mechanisms exist in each of the domains, and this has a direct effect on the risk associated with breach or compromise. Operating systems tend to have a very tight control and prevent cross-process data issues such as error or contamination. The next aspect of risk during processing is within the process access to the data, and a variety of attack techniques address this channel specifically. Data in transit is subject to breach or compromise from a variety of network level attacks and vulnerabilities. Some of these are under the control of the enterprise and some are not. One primary mitigation step is data minimization. Data minimization efforts can play a key role in both operational efficiency and security. One of the first rules associated with data in this is don't keep what you don't need. So the next step is identifying or detecting an incident. An incident is defined as a situation that departs from normal routine operation. Whether an incident is important or not is the first determination to be made as part of an incident response process. A key first step is in the processing of information and the determination of whether or not to invoke incident response processes. Incident information can come from a wide range of sources, including logs, employees, help desk calls, system monitoring, security tools, and more. The challenge is to detect that something other than the simple common routine errors is occurring. When evidence accumulates, or in some cases when specific items such as security device logs indicate a potential incident. The next step is to escalate the situation to the incident response team. For detection, of course, an incident response team cannot begin an investigation until a suspected incident has been detected. At that point, the detection phase of the incident response policy kicks in. One of the first jobs of the incident response team is to determine whether an actual security incident has occurred. Many things can be misinterpreted as a possible security incident. The incident response team must investigate each reported incident and treat it as a potential security incident until it can be determined whether or not it is. Security incidents can take a variety of forms, and who discovers the incident will vary as well. So if an incident has been identified or detected, there needs to be an initial response. Although there is no such thing as a typical incident, for any incident there is a series of questions that can be answered to form a proper initial response. Regardless of the source, the following items are important to determine during an initial response. Current time and date. What is reporting the incident? Is it an IDS or a user? Nature of the incident. When the incident occurred, so is it happening now when it's being reported, or did it previously happen days ago? Hardware and software that's involved in the incident, and the point of contact for the involved person. With initial responses, there are often errors made. Mistakes such as these are common during initial response. Failure to document findings appropriately. Failure to notify or provide accurate information to decision makers. Failure to record and control access to digital evidence. Waiting too long before reporting, and underestimating the scope of the evidence that may be found. So quite often when we do a incident response, we are so eager to stop the problem, in other words, control the hemorrhaging, if it's like, let's say, a data exfil going on, trying to stop the data from being exfiltrated, that we often destroy evidence in the initial response. So it's very important that you understand really how important is it to stop what's going on versus how important is it to gather evidence. And you really want to bring in experienced people on this, if you can, and ensure that you're gathering the right evidence, especially if there's a possibility there's a crime involved and the need to prosecute. Now, your first responder, a cyber first responder, must do as much as possible to control damage or loss of evidence. I was just mentioning that on the last slide. Obviously, as time passes, evidence can be tampered with or destroyed. Look around on the desk, on the Rolodex, under the keyboard, in the desktop storage areas, and the cubicle bulletin boards for any information that might be relevant. Secure floppy disks, optical drives, flash memory cards, USB drives, tapes, and other removable media. Request copies of logs as soon as possible. Most ISPs will protect logs that could be subpoenaed. Take photos. Some localities require the use of Polaroid photos, as they are more difficult to modify without obvious tampering. Or take video. Include photos of operating computer screens and hardware components from multiple angles. Be sure to photograph internal components before removing them for analysis. The first responder can do much to prevent damage and can cause significant loss of by digitally altering evidence, even inadvertently. Collecting data should be done in a forensically sound nature and be sure to pay attention to recording time values so time offsets can be calculated. So when you're gathering, if let's say the computer is up and still running, there are suites of software out there that allow you to grab memory. A product that is free is Volatility on Linux, and another one is Mandiant's Redline that allow you to capture what's in memory. Now, if for some reason you have to move, let's say, a laptop, and you can't capture that memory and what's in it at the moment, you can put the computer to sleep, so all that information is stored down to a file. Just understand that you are altering the computer system when you do that. So you have to take into consideration how important is gathering what's in that memory versus not altering the system as it's running at the moment. Other things to take in consideration if you're using some kind of hard disk encryption or some kind of data loss prevention, it may be that once you shut that computer off, if that person who owns that computer does not cooperate and provide you with a password, you may not be able to recover any evidence. So before you shut down that system, you need to know for sure whether or not there is any kind of disk encryption like BitLocker installed on it. Otherwise, you may not be able to access that evidence. That would be another reason why you would want to get a memory dump, because the key to the encryption would be stored at that point in physical memory as the system's running. So some common errors that first responders often make is technical mistakes during the initial response include altering time date stamps on evidence, killing rogue processes, patching the system, not recording the steps taken on the system, and not acting passively. So instead you're using active response. You're changing things and causing things that changes dates on files and things of that sort, therefore losing evidence as you're doing it. So try to alter the system as little as possible in your initial response. Next, in your incident response, you want to isolate the incident as much as possible and keep that incident from affecting other systems around it. First, there's containment and eradication. Once the incident response team has determined that an incident most likely has occurred, it must attempt to quickly contain the problem at this point or very soon after containment begins. Depending on the severity of the incident, management needs to decide whether the organization intends to prosecute the individual who has caused the incident or simply wants to restore operations as quick as possible without regard to possibly destroying evidence. Quarantining is a process of isolating an object from its surroundings, preventing normal access methods. The machine may be allowed to run, but its connection to other machines is broken in a manner to prevent the spread of infection. Quarantine can be accomplished through a variety of mechanisms, including the erection of firewalls restricting communications between machines. Then there's device removal. It's simply removing from production and replacing a device. When device removal entails the physical change of hardware, this is a resource-intensive operation. So more often than not, people don't want to use the resources if they don't have to. So removing a device is often a last resort. The reimaging of a machine can be a time-consuming and difficult endeavor, and the advent of virtual machine changes this entirely, as the provision of virtual images on hardware can be accomplished in a much quicker fashion. So it's easier to replace a virtualized server than it is to replace a hardware-based server. So that might come into determining whether or not you want to replace it or not. Is virtualization being used? Escalation and notification is a key decision point in the initial response. When a threshold of information becomes known to an operator or to and the operator decides to escalate the situation, the incident response process moves to a notification escalation phase. When the incident response team is notified of a potential incident, its first steps are to confirm the existence, scope, and magnitude of the event, then respond accordingly. This is typically done through a two-step escalation process, where a minimal quick response team begins and then adds members as necessitated by the issue. The response to an incident will be highly dependent upon the particular circumstances of the intrusion. There are many paths one can take in the steps associated with an incident. The challenge is choosing the best step in each case. A variety of factors should be considered in the planning and deployment of strategies, including but not limited to the following. How critical are the impacted systems? How sensitive is the data? What is the potential overall dollar loss involved, or rate of loss? How much downtime can be tolerated? Who are the perpetrators? What is the skill level of the attacker? And does the incident have adverse publicity potential? So therefore, if it's something that's your public-facing website, it has been defaced with, let's say, inappropriate material that can cause legal or public outcries, something of that sort, you're going to want to address that immediately to avoid the backlash that can come from the public. You could do that without necessarily destroying your evidence by by setting up, let's say, a temporary site or server, things of that sort. There are numerous issues that need to be determined with respect to the upcoming investigation. Addressing these issues help to provide focal points during the investigation. So when formulating your strategy, you need to think about restoring normal operations. Do you need offline recovery? Do you need online recovery? Determine public relations play. To spin or not to spin the incident. Determine probable attacker. Is it an internal attacker? And if so, do you handle it internally or do you prosecute legally? If it's an external, do you prosecute? Do you involve law enforcement at all? Then you determine the type of attack. Is it a denial of service of some sort? Is it a theft or vandalism or a policy violation? Is this an ongoing intrusion or a single event? Is it pivoting? Is it really that what we're seeing is that they're using us or using the device and activity we're seeing to pivot to some other place to do something else? And then classify the victim system. Is it a critical server or application? What are the number of users that need that server or application? What other systems are affected by what's going on? You need to determine how important or how big of an impact the incident is. The true investigation phase of an incident is a multi-step, multi-part event. With the exception of very simple events, most incidents involve multiple machines and potentially impact the business in multiple ways. The primary objective of the investigative phase is to make the following determinations. What happened? What systems are affected? What was compromised? What was the vulnerability that was used to get in? Who did it, if you can determine the attribution of the event? And what are the recovery and remediation options available to us? And then when you do gather evidence such as hard drives, you want to make sure you're performing your analysis on duplicates, not the original drives. So you want to duplicate the drives for forensic purposes. It's important to have accurate copies and proper hash values so that any analysis is performed under proper conditions. You want to be able to show that you have not tampered with the evidence at all. Proper disk duplication is necessary to ensure all data, including metadata, is properly captured and analyzed as part of the overall process. Part of the investigation might require network monitoring. To monitor network flow, including who is talking to whom, one source of information is NetFlow data. NetFlow is a protocol standard for the collection of network metadata on the flows of network traffic. NetFlow is now an IETF standard and allows for unidirectional captures of communication metadata. NetFlow can identify both common and unique data flows, and in the case of incident response, typically the new and the unique NetFlow patterns are of most interest to incident responders. A flow is unidirectional, so bidirectional flow would be recorded as two separate flows. NetFlow data is defined by 7 unique keys. The source IP, the destination IP, the source port, destination port, layer 3 protocol, TOS, and input interface. After you've done the investigation, or maybe even while you're in parallel, depending on how you're doing it, you want to start the recovery and reconstitution process. Recovery is an important step in all incidents. One of the first rules is to not trust a system that has been compromised, and this includes all aspects of an operating system. You basically want to either restore from a earlier backup, or you're going to want to reinstall. I will tell you, more often than not, I prefer doing a reinstall clean, because when you're restoring, you may be restoring some of what the attacker had used to get into your system. It really depends on how old of a backup you're using and how long that attacker has been in your system. A key aspect in many incidents is that of external communications. Having a communication expert who is familiar with dealing with the press and has the language nuances necessary to convey the correct information and not inflame the situation is essential to the success of any communications plan. So in other words, you want somebody who's able to speak to the press and say, yes, the bank has had an incident, but everything is okay, and not create a panic of people running to the ATMs to pull out their money immediately. Recovery can be a two-step process. First, the essential business functions can be recovered, enabling business operations to resume. So that's your highest priority first. Then the complete restoration of all services and operations, because of the difficulty and uncertainty involved in repairing systems. Most best practice today involves reconstituting the underlying system and then transferring the operational data. So as I was saying before, we would more likely just rebuild the system from scratch and hardening it against what was discovered rather than restoring a backup. Staging the recovery operation in a prioritized fashion allows a graceful return to an operating condition. Reporting is another one that, even though in the response process it comes later in the response, it is possible to be doing it in parallel to the rest of the response steps, such as investigation and restoring and reconstitution. However, just for the sake of having a defined process, they put reporting here, that after the system has been restored, the incident response team creates a report of the incident. It details what was discovered, how it was discovered, and what was done, and the results. This report acts as a corporate memory and can be used for future incidents. Part of the report will be recommendations, if appropriate, to change existing policies and procedures, including disaster recovery and business continuity. The similarity in objectives makes a natural overlap, and the cross-pollination between these operations is important to make all processes as efficient as possible. Now, you may be doing the report for your own organization, but one thing you need also to keep in mind, depending on who you are working for, is there might be reporting requirements outside of your organization. For example, if it involves PII, you might be required to report by law to the U.S. CERT the incident loss. There might be parts of law that require that you report to a local commissioner, like insurance commissioner or something of that sort, if that's the business you're supporting, or stock exchange, the Security and Exchange Commission, banking, different business sectors. It really comes down to regulations, but some of them require that you immediately report and then you provide updates. So this is loosely where it is because they're talking from an internal perspective within the company, but you need to be aware of what regulations your corporation or organization is bound to, and ensure that you are following those requirements as well. In addition to good notes being necessary in order to provide evidence to what you did during your investigation and response, good notes are important for this last step here too. Following up and developing lessons learned. An after-action report should be created to outline what happened and how it was addressed. Recommendations for improving processes and policies should be incorporated so that a repeat incident will not occur. If prosecution of the individual responsible is desired, additional time will be spent helping law enforcement agencies and possibly testifying in court. Training material may also need to be developed or modified as part of the new modified policies and procedures that are documented or determined through the incident response. In the reporting process, a critical assessment of what went right, what went wrong, what could be improved, and what should be continued is prepared as a form of lessons learned. This is a critical part of self-improvement. It is not meant to place blame, but rather to assist in future prevention. Having things go wrong in a complex environment is part of normal operations. Having repeat failures that are preventable is not. Shame on you if you fool me once, or shame on me if you fool me twice, is basically what they're saying. The key to the lessons learned section of the report is to make the necessary changes so that the repeat event will not occur. Because many incidents are the result of attackers using known methods, once the attack patterns are known in an enterprise and methods exist to mitigate them, then it is task of the entire enterprise to take the necessary actions to mitigate future events. So for years in the security industry, they used to talk about keeping the bad guys out. And that's all they talked about was defense, defense, defense. The reality is today, you're no longer an organization that has not been penetrated, or you have been penetrated. It is you are a organization who has detected that they're there, and then you are an organization who has not detected they're there. You either know that you've been hacked or you don't know that you've been hacked. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So the new standard of information security involves living in a state of compromise, where one should always expect the adversaries are active in their network. It is unrealistic to expect that you can keep attackers out of your network. Operating in a state of compromise does not mean that one must suffer significant loss. A working assumption when planning for responding to and managing the overall incident response process is that the systems are compromised and that prevention cannot be the only means of defense. Coming back to our good friends at NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, a U.S. government entity under the direction of the Department of Commerce, produced a wide range of special publications in the area of computer security. Grouped in several different categories, the most relevant special publications for incident response come from the Special Publications 800 series. So under the 800 series, there's the Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, the Security Content Automation Protocol, the Security Continuous Monitoring for Federal Information Systems and Organizations, Guide to Selecting Information Technology Security Products, the Guide for Enterprise Patch Management Technologies, and a Guide for Using Vulnerability Naming Schemes. So in April of 2015, the U.S. Department of Justice Cybersecurity Unit released a Best Practices document. Best Practices for Victims Response and Reporting of Cyber Incidents. As I said before, reporting is not just inside your organization. There may be requirements to report legally to other authorities or organizations. This document identifies steps to take before a cyber incident, the steps to take during an incident response action, a list of actions not to take, and what to do after the incident. What not to do as part of incident response. The U.S. Department of Justice has 2 specific recommended steps that you should not take as part of an incident response plan. Do not use the compromised system to communicate. Do not hack into or damage another network or system. So I've often said this to people is, why would you want to send email from a mail server or a host computer that you believe is compromised? Why would you want to send an email regarding the incident response that's ongoing, trying to find that? That's letting the bad guys know that you're on to them and they're following your steps based upon what you're talking about in the emails. And don't hack into or damage another network. If you try to go offensive during your incident response, you become the criminal. If you are hacking into another system, it doesn't matter if it's here in the United States or not, you are the one who is faced with potential criminal prosecution. The victim organization should always assume that any communication across affected machines would be compromised. This eavesdropping action is standard hacker behavior, and if you tip off your actions, they can counter before you regain control of your systems. Hacking, even retaliatory hacking, is illegal, and given the difficulty in attribution, attempts to respond by hacking the hacker may accidentally result in hacking an innocent third-party machine. In cybersecurity, we often talk about indicators of compromise. They are artifacts left behind from computer intrusion activity. Detection of indicators of compromise is a quick way to jumpstart a response element. Indicators of compromises act as a tripwire for responders. An IOC can be tied to a specific observable event, which they can be traced to related events and to stateful events such as registry keys. So let's look at some indicators of compromise. Unusual outbound traffic. So for example, if you're seeing a large data flow going out to an FTP site that you have no reason to be sending data to, that would be an indicator that there's a compromise. Geographical irregularities. So if you're seeing people connecting from places that you shouldn't be seeing connection to your network, then that's an anomaly that needs to be noted as a potential indicator of a compromise. Communications going to countries in which no business ties exist is another key indicator that data is going to where it shouldn't. Unusual login activity, so failed logins, login failures to non-existent accounts, and so forth indicate compromise. Anomalous usage patterns for privileged accounts, so changes in the pattern of when administrators typically operate and what they typically access indicates compromise. Changes in database access patterns. This indicates hackers are searching for data or reading it to collect large quantities. Automated web traffic. Timing can show some requests are scripts, not humans. This is that beaconing I was previously talking about. It happens on a regular basis, things of that sort. Change in HTML response sizes. So SQL injection can result in large HTML response sizes. Continuing with indicators of compromises, large number of requests for specific files. Numerous requests for specific files such as join.php may indicate automated attack patterns. Mismatched ports to application traffic, so common method of attempting to hide activities. Unusual DNS requests, so looking for .com names that don't make sense. And you often see the malicious ones look more like random characters and numbers than actual words relating to a commercial site. Unusual DNS requests, because this could be beaconing, or it could be looking for to resolve weird IP names, and I just mentioned it, like it could be random numbers and characters. So you want to look at your DNS logs. It's a good way to detect something going on. Unusual registry changes, indications of changes to a system state. Unexpected patching. Some hackers will patch to prevent other hackers from entering a target. So once they get in through a vulnerability, they close the door behind them so that nobody else could try to use that system against them as well. So it's kind of like one hacker claiming territory and not letting another hacker in. So they'll patch the very same vulnerabilities they used to get in. Bundles of data and files in wrong place. So large aggregations of data, frequently encrypted, maybe files being prepared for exfiltration, things of that sort. Changes to mobile device profiles. Mobile is the new perimeter, and changes may indicate malware. And then distributed denial of service attacks. So denial of service is used as a tool to provide smoke screens or distractions. It's what I often call the blinky lights. More often than not, just like a magician will redirect you to look at their hand at one place, while the actual action that's being used for the magic trick is done with another hand. A lot of times very loud and very loud attacks that can seem like it's doing a lot and make that easily draw attention to it. If you see those, it may mean that somebody is doing something somewhere else and trying to draw your attention away from what they're doing. So it might be a massive, let's say, brute force attack on account passwords from one set of IP addresses, and maybe even something to set up red flags is those IP addresses are foreign IPs and they're intentionally being used to send up that flag. So you're paying attention to what connections are being made from that IP and trying to brute force the password. Meanwhile, what you don't see is that there's logins to administrator accounts that the administrator's not there. Maybe the administrator's on vacation or something like that. But there's a login happening to the account, and it's not being flagged because you're busy paying attention to the other stuff, the brute force or something of that sort. So continuing on with standards and best practices, one of the things you will hear, and I believe it was Lockheed Martin that coined this phrase, it was one of the defense contractors, maybe it was Northrop Grumman, but you'll hear of a phrase in cyber now called cyber kill chain. It's a modern cyber attack is a complex multi-stage process. The concept of a kill chain is the targeting of specific steps of a multi-step process with the goal of disrupting the overall process. So the sooner you can interrupt, or the earlier stages you can interrupt it in, the less damage that is likely to have been done to your systems. Taking the information already presented, we know that the steps that hackers take, and we have indicators that can clue us into the current status of an attack. Using this information, we can plan specific interventions to each step of the attacker's process. Okay, so if we know that they're still working on trying to exploit, then we know that they're probably going to continue looking for and scanning for vulnerabilities of unpatched systems. In which case, we can counteract that by patching and ensuring that systems are all up to date with their patches. So this last slide is kind of cool for me because MITRE has actually worked with us in the Massachusetts National Guard with the development of the STIX protocol. But MITRE has been working with the government and industry and academia and has created a set of techniques called Making Security Measurable to improve the measurability of security. This is a comprehensive effort, including registries of specific baseline data, standardized languages for the accurate communication of security information, and formats and standardized processes to facilitate accurate and timely communications. So what they're really just saying is they're standardizing how we talk about cyber, so that when they say a particular word, when they say what an incident is, when they say what a compromise is, that people understand exactly what they're saying. So there's the STIX and TAXI model, and then there's the SciBox. I'm not expecting you to memorize either of these two schemas. Just understand that they exist there because the idea is to create a common language. The same way that TCP and IP is a common protocol, so that different systems like Unix, Linux, and Windows can all talk to each other. The STIX, TAXI, and SciBox is created for people who need to talk and collaborate in cyber to use a common language to ensure that we all understand each other when we're talking. I'm your instructor, Peter Keurig for Nashville Community College. Thank you for watching.